It gives me great honor to give the floor now to President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi of the Arab Republic of Egypt. In the name of God, the Beneficent and Most Merciful. Mr. Abdullah Shahid, the President of the 76th General Assembly of the United Nations. First of all, let me extend my congratulations to you and your friendly country for having assumed the chairmanship of this session of the United Nations General Assembly. Wishing you all the best in your work, and I'd like to praise the constructive role done by the Secretary General of the United Nations, who has been doing continued and sustainable effort in order to repair and maintain international relations at the helm of the United Nations, which is now 75 years of age. To helping the United Nations to construct peace. The COVID-19, the pandemic, which has been going on, which has persistently been there for 2 years, makes it incumbent upon all international community members to cooperate together, however developed they are. So it's noteworthy that the General Assembly of this year is so important. The agenda for this of the General Assembly wraps up the important concerns. This all sheds light on the need to make available vaccines to all peoples of the world. Vaccines have to be made so rapidly, and making available vaccines, COVID-19 pandemics should be made available as soon as possible. We're so happy to review at this forum, together with the United Nations and regional organizations, which have been contributing enormously to facing the challenges. Mr. President, the Egyptian state takes well into account diversified economic development path, because Egypt has noticed that developed nations have exclusively kept vaccines for themselves. Egypt, in doing so, is hoping that the needs of vaccines for the African continent should be met as soon as possible, because the continent of Africa has always borne the brunt of COVID-19. So we do have the vaccines be made available as soon as possible. Egypt, that's why Egypt has always been keenly interested in setting up its own vaccine industry, not only to meet local needs, but export the surplus to the continent of Africa. Dear representatives, the phenomenon has always been the replica of a reality, and reflected the fact that support should be widened to the developing nations, including nations with medium income. Those countries have an essential importance on the international community. That's why these nations have always been the hub of development and an engine and locomotive for economic development. In the light of international moves to earmark millions of special drawing rights through the International Monetary Fund, Egypt sees that it's essential that these resources should be utilized in order to serve the needs of the developing nations, including the medium-income countries. Within this framework, Egypt is calling on creditors to alleviate the burden, to ease the burden of debts on these countries, and ease the conditions for getting loans from international institutions by So because these measures as such are essential and vital for supporting national development. According to regional and international development agendas, Mr. President, we firmly believe that development should be done in an overall development in order, and we as countries we should ensure a decent life for our individuals, and towards that end Egypt has introduced a set of package of policies for economic reform, particularly for the vulnerable. Egypt has to a large extent has achieved success, and Egypt has been working to shrink economic disparities among social strata. We believe that when citizens have full access, unrestricted access to services, this is going to bring a healthy climate for creativity to flourish and to push forward economic development further forward. Mr. President, Egypt is fully aware of the threat of the environmental degradation on the future of forthcoming generation, on the very existence of these coming generations, with the negative impact noticeable to everyone. We have seen over the past period, we have seen a lot of harsh phenomena like heavy rains, inundations, unprecedented rise of temperatures, as well as forest fires, coupled with devastating social and economic impacts which have been burdening governments towards achieving welfare, and emanating from our common moral responsibilities towards forthcoming generations. And in keeping up with our goals, Egypt has been persistently pursuing and doing all utmost efforts in order to avert and to head off a point where everything will be irreplaceable and irreparable. And in the light of Egypt's active role in climate change, Egypt is looking forward to hosting the 21st session of the Climate Change Conference. Mr. President, terrorism, Mr. President, remains one of the gravest threats to the international community. This phenomenon infringes on the essential rights of citizens, particularly on top of which being the right to life.
في مقدمتها الحق في الحياة، وتعيق جهود الحكومات نحو بلوغ الأهداف الاقتصادية والاجتماعية والثقافية لشعوبها. لذلك تشدد مصر على أنه لا يمكن القضاء على الإرهاب إلا من خلال مواجهة الفكر التكفيري والمتطرف المتسبب في تلك الظاهرة البغيضة، وذلك
So it also includes certain social dimensions. All sources of terror have to be starved of support, have to be drained. And we also need an approach of international cooperation. That's why, and within the framework of all countries respecting their own commitments and adhering to all relevant United Nations Security Council resolution, Egypt is highlighting the fact that countries hosting terror have to be faced, have to be dissuaded from doing so. They shouldn't be allowed to let terrorists go through their own territories. Ladies and gentlemen, Egypt has always been interested in upgrading human rights, and towards that end Egypt has been pursuing a lot of efforts in order to do so.
في إطار من احترام مبادئ المواطنة.
We do believe that when human rights are ensured, overall development will much easier to achieve. We have to ensure the liberties and essential rights of freedoms. There has been crystal clear developments because Egypt has recently introduced amended articles in its human rights documents to help achieve this objective. A national strategy for human rights has recently been released and adopted by Egypt, with all civil society organizations contributed to it. So, according to the overall approach pursued by my own country, we'll be doing our best to achieve it. Mr. President, we do hope the 15th session of the United Nations, Egypt's hosting of the 15th session of the United Nations Council of Human Rights has really demonstrated how Egypt has effectively contributed to human rights, and it reflected the confidence which the international community has in Egypt, as Egypt has ranked the 7th. Egyptian institutions like the army and police and all other institutions have been working hard to protect the human rights. Mr. President, Egypt has always asserted, has always reiterated that stability cannot be achieved in the Middle East without, in the absence of an overall and just solution to the Palestinian cause, based on international legitimacy, resolution, and the creation of a Palestinian state along the boundaries of 1967, with East Jerusalem being the capital. Towards that end, Egypt asserts the importance of ceasefire hammered out in May the 20th, and Egypt is calling on the international community to do whatever is necessary in order to improve the living conditions of the Palestinian people and giving access, giving unrestricted access to supplies to the Palestinian people. As we do this, we expect the international community to take into account that the Middle East region is geographically unique. But however, it comes on top of the world's most turbulent regions, the hottest spots, the hotspots of flashpoints in the world. So we have had to confront a lot of challenges. We need to be consistent. We need to be coherent in order to cope with all these challenges which have been facing, whether these challenges be sectarian or economic or whatever. Rich countries, rich with Iraq, which is rich in resources, or countries, other countries, Yemen and Iraq, which are Yemen and Iraq, and some other regional nations in the Middle East region. Despite the fact they are always rich with the resources, have been suffering harshly. We reject interference in Arab affairs. Egypt is closely linked to. Egypt cherishes its geographical position. And I take interest to clarify, I have to assert that cooperation among African nations cannot be achieved by one country achieving its own welfare at the expense of other nations. The River Nile has always been a source and a life artery for Egypt. So that's why Egypt has been doing persistent effort in order to face grave to face the consequences of the Renaissance Dam by Ethiopia. So Egypt has been positively negotiating with the country. However, but the other party has opted for a fait accompli approach. So this, however, if this dam is not confronted, this will be a grave threat to security and stability in Egypt. So Egypt has been staunchly supporting African nations' mediations by friendly countries as well as by the United Nations. Egypt is hoping that this conflict be settled as soon as possible in order to face up to the challenges faced by constituting by the Ethiopian Renaissance Dam in order to save the lives of Egyptians and Sudanese peoples. This is based not only on good relations but also on legal documents and legal principles. Egypt has always been favoring the implementation of international law principles governing the use of international rivers. Before, Mr. President, before I come to the conclusion of my speech, multilateral diplomatic action has always been so important, and in face of growing challenges and threats to our world, multilateral action remains a live buoy for the international community in facing challenges. As we are facing today growing challenges, it's incumbent upon us, we have to pause a little bit in order to conduct a review of all the challenges which have been overshadowing us in order to maintain and save humankind. Egypt is making this call to brothers in humanity in order to do concerted and coordinated action. We are serious towards achieving our goals. Thank you very much, Mr. President, for good listening. Wish you a successful session. Thank you.
We just heard the President Abdel Fattah Sisi addressing the 76th session of the UN General Assembly. Worth noting, the President started his speech by thanking the head of this round of the General Assembly. He also praised the constructive role done by the UN Secretary General. The President highlighted that COVID-19 prompted the whole world to cooperate, and stressing on the need to make available vaccines to the world rapidly. He highlighted that Egypt is taking in its wake, or in its attempt to take a diversified economic path. Egypt has been attempting to develop the vaccine itself, and is keen on establishing that industry to cover Africa, which he stressed is carrying the brunt of COVID-19 thus far. He called on all credit institutions, the International Monetary Fund and other institutions to serve developing countries. He called on the creditors to ease the burden on developing countries, especially in the wake of COVID-19 repercussions. He highlighted that Egypt introduced several economic reform packages for the vulnerable, stressing that Egypt is working strongly to shrink the gap between the different stratas in the country. Furthermore, the president said that Egypt is fully aware of the grave environmental problems that face our globe, especially and the negative repercussions that those problems will have on future generations to come, and highlighted the environmental impact that we are witnessing nowadays, from fires to rains and otherwise. He said that in its commitment to work on environmental issues, Egypt is honored to host the 21st session of the Climate Change Conference. The president, also addressing the UN General Assembly, highlighted one of the grave threats that threaten our globe, which is terrorism. He called on the need for the world to be committed and to consolidate efforts to confront that issue, especially to address sources of support for terrorist organizations. The president also addressed the issue of human rights, highlighting that Egypt recently upgraded and amended a number of articles pertaining to that issue, and that we have just issued a national strategy that has recently been adopted to confront that issue. The president also highlighted how Egypt hosted the 15th session of the UN Human Rights Council, which is reflective of the country's commitment to protect human rights. He also said that Egypt has also been very keen on highlighting continuously that the only way to achieve peace and stability regionally, or the backbone of that, is resolving the Palestinian issue, reaching a two-state solution based on the 1967 borders. He called on the global world to consolidate efforts to improve the life of the Palestinian people and to reach peace. The president stressed that this region is very vulnerable, and we need to be consistent in facing all challenges that confront us. He even called on, said that even rich countries in the region like Iran, Iraq and Yemen are having troubles, stressing that it is rejected, or that we reject interference in Arab affairs. The president also addressed one of the critical issues pertaining to Egypt, which is the River Nile issue. He highlighted and stressed that the Nile is a source of life for Egypt, which is why we are trying to positively negotiate, highlighting that unfortunately the other party opted to act unilaterally. He stressed that the Nile issue is issue of grave consequences for Egypt, reflecting on Egyptian security and stability, and he hopes that this issue can be resolved soon. He said that Egypt has always been adamant on respecting international laws and regulations, especially in the principles governing the Nile waters. The president wrapped up his speech by saying that we have a number of growing challenges globally, and it is incumbent that the world takes a pause and reviews those challenges carefully and consolidates efforts to confront them, to serve, to save and maintain mankind. That was the President Abdel Fattah Sisi addressing the 76th session of the UN General Assembly. We'll be right back after this, so please stay with us.